The definition of a text changes once you enter these classes, these literary theory classes, because a text is not just um, a text that you know of in literature, like your Jane Eyre or novel, or your Pride and Prejudice or novel, or novels you have had in your syllabus previously, The Test of the Uber Village, or uh, Thomas Hardy's Any Text, Charles Dickens, D.H. Lawrence. Only these writers do not make and constitute a text. But a text is much more and much beyond these books that have a cover and that are a few pages inside it and a story from beginning which has a beginning, a middle, and an end, as Aristotle would have it. But there is more to a text. This is studied through cultural studies, and Marxism also teaches you a bit of it, how this notion of text expands. And the basic theory that gives you the definition of a text, of an author, of a reader, of a critic, is the theory of structuralism. And this is where we begin. We begin with the theory of structuralism so that your basic concepts, basic notions are clarified in this class about a text. But we cannot, of course, jump into what a text is, because these are what later theories talked about, what a text is. Only later theories talk about a text. They talk about an author. Who can be an author? I'll stop annotating it because I can read your name. I know who is doing it. I can read the name. A text, an author, a reader. Also, the reader response theory that comes in later on is also an offshoot of the same structural theory. So, this is why we begin with the basic theory of structuralism or theory of structuralism. I wrote this on this side because this is the end point where we will ultimately reach once we finish the idea of structuralism. So it may initially sound quite boring because we are dealing with this smallest part of language, the smallest part of language, which is not a word. The smallest part of it is considered to be a sign. So we don't deal with this notion of a word, but a sign. Give me a moment. So coming back to the notions of a sign and a word, how is a sign different from a word? A word is something you understand as you can unmute yourself and then I'll ask you questions. Give me a moment. Yes. So who wants to speak? What do you understand by a sign? Sorry, a word. Quickly. What do you understand by a word? Quick.
Ma'am, alphabets make a word.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you. Or what? Is that Sahiba speaking? Is that you, Sahiba?
Yes, ma'am.
So what did you say a word is?
Ma'am, combination of alphabets.
Oh, combination of letters. Alphabet.
Letters.
Alphabet is हर language का एक alphabet होता है. English alphabet has how many letters? 20?
26.
English alphabet has 26 letters, but the alphabet is just one. Alpha, beta, gamma. Alpha, beta is Greek alphabet has alpha, beta, gamma, lambda. जो भी आपने maths में पढ़े होंगे. They are the letters from Greek alphabet. Alphabet is the short form of all the letters in a language. Urdu alphabet, English alphabet. Yes, Naveed. Naveed, do you want to say anything? Do you want to add? Okay. So a word can constitute of letters, say letter C plus letter A plus letter T becomes a word. But structuralism does not study a word, it studies a sign. It says that all language, the basic component of all language is a sign. This concept was given by Ferdinand de Saussure. So we'll be doing structuralism, visiting structuralism from the first name is Ferdinand de Saussure, who is the father of this theory, Ferdinand de Saussure. He is the one who studied language and broke it down into units. The unit of a language he studied, he called it a sign, and then further divided this sign. He said sign is any meaningful sound. Any meaningful sound is a sign. Or any meaningful combination of sounds that you see together is a sign. What you see is a word, but what you hear is something else. It's called a phone, Phone, phone. Phone means it has a sound. Now, sign he divided into two parts, a signified and a signifier. Most of you already know this, but this is for the ones who have joined these classes to learn from the basic. The signifier and the signified. According to Saussure, the two parts of a sign is what makes it meaningful. The first is signifier. Signifier, he says, is the sound of the word or what you see, the image of the word. By the sound, I would give you an example. By the sound, I mean if I say and I speak cat, I said and you heard cat. And now the other part of a signifier, the form of a signifier is the image. I'll not say, I'll only write. So here you combined three images. Image 1, image 2, image 3. Together this image resulted in something that popped up in your mind. That is the signified. And in the first case of a sound, I combined three sounds. K, A, T, cat. The sound cat also resulted in something similar that popped up in your mind. That image is the signified. What I meant by it. मुझे बनानी नहीं आ रही, आंख मार रही है, बनाऊंगी भी नहीं गुना. So this signified is what came in your mind. Is he referred it to as the signified, and the sound he referred to as one form of a signifier, and the image he referred to as second form of the signifier. A signifier can be in two forms, in the form of a sound or in the form of an image. But the signifier that comes in your mind is the same of both the kinds of signifiers, be it in the form of an image or in the form of a sound. This is basic idea of a sign. If anybody has a question, ask me, and then I'll move to the second part of the discussion. I'll leave the board like that and take questions from you. Quickly, speak up. You can unmute yourself and ask, or you can write down in chat. Sahil, Mehak, you haven't studied this before. Can you tell me?
Yes, ma'am. I have not studied.
Have you?
No, ma'am.
No, you haven't. So, could you follow what Saussure has said in his theory of structuralism? Just the concept of sign. Just the concept of sign.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, he said structuralism studies a sign and not a word. And sign has two parts. One is signified and second is signified. In signifier, sound sign is any meaningful sound or any meaningful image. And signified is when that image mm, pops up in our mind. That's signified.
Very good. Thank you, Mehak. Sahil Mehak, sorry. So yes, that is basically a sign. Naveed, could you follow the concept of sign? Yes, Naveed, could you follow the concept of sign? Anyway. Okay. Naveed, your audio is not connect. अच्छा ये तो ये भी नहीं सुनेगा ना, लिख के ही बताओ. Sabrine, do not write this in private chat. Naveed को लिखो. Let's move on to the second concept. So from sign, he complicated the idea. He did not simply just talk about sign, he complicated it a bit further. So I'll give you the binaries that he talked about, and we'll talk about them one by one. The first binary is clear with you. Binary means opposition. Signifier and signified binary is quite clear with you. The other binaries he gave, I'll write this down and you will note it. The other binary he said is arbitrary and systematic. Third, he said about language, it has langue and parole. Parole. Langue and parole. Fourth, he said language is also divided on a paradigmatic and a syntagmatic level.
Yeah.
Yes, Naveed, you are now connected. The next one he said is that language has a diachronic and synchronic relationship. नवीद इस वक्त म्यूट कर दो जब मैं क्वेश्चन पूछूं तब अनम्यूट कर देना diachronic and synchronic relationship. We'll deal with each of them one by one. The first one is done. You're clear with signifier, signified, binary. Let's move to the second one. Now, what does he mean by language is arbitrary and language is also systematic? Now, this is the same language that he says is composed of a sign. So sign is clear, sign made up of signifier, signified. The second concept will follow. You will not understand arbitrary systematic relationship unless and until signifier, signified concept is very clear with you. Okay. Now, what does he say about arbitrariness of a language? By arbitrariness, he says the relationship between a signified and a signifier is arbitrary. The relationship between a signified and a signifier is arbitrary. Arbitrary means there is no fixed relationship between the signifier and the signified. Means this signifier that we took as an example, we can take any other example. This thing in itself, the animal in itself has nothing close to these letters or these sounds. The animal has nothing to do with the sound cat. It does not say, call me cat. Of course, there's a relationship between if we say meow and the sound a cat makes. Is there a relationship? That relationship is called that there is a systematic relationship between meow and the sound that a cat makes. So all onomatopoeic words do have onomatopoeic. What's the spelling? I think there's no. So this relationship between the signifier and signified is not like that of the onomatopoeic words, where the sound matches the word. So there is a relationship between the two. Because had there been such a thing that the relation between the two is systematic, all signifiers in all languages would be the same. But is cat the same word used in all the languages for the cat, the animal? The cat, the animal, is something that Africans are familiar with, but they do not call him a cat, call it a cat. We do not call it a cat. We in Kashmiri call it a bear. Bear मुझे लिखना नहीं आएगा, मैं ऐसे लिखती हूँ. And in Urdu we call it a billi. The point he makes is that had there been a systematic relationship between a signified and a signifier, all the languages would have the same word for it. But since this is not fixed, since it's arbitrary, people choose the word for a thing. People choose it. It's based on choice. It's based on the wish of the people. Wish. It's based on choice. Therefore, it's arbitrary. Wishful. It's arbitrary because it's wishful. Whatever one feels like, one calls the thing by that name. Similarly, you can take any example. A table does not say, call me a table. It doesn't look like the word table does. Is there any shape matching with table here? No, then why is it called table? Secondly, does this letter tell you that you have to make a sound t? This letter has nothing to do with the sound t. Had there been like anything like that, this would not have been any letter. This would not have been any letter. This means that the relationships between the two are arbitrary. Do you understand what I mean? But he says there is also a systematic relationship between languages. Now, what does he mean that language is both arbitrary and systematic? Now, this is the arbitrariness in language. What you choose to call a thing is arbitrary, it's not systematic. But language is systematic. One, that all people of one language choose one word together in a community to call a thing by a name. If all the members of a society will say, I'll call it Billy, you will call it a man, I'll call it sink, you call it a tab. What will happen if language is not systematic and arbitrary like this? Communication will break down. So language is arbitrary, of course, but not completely arbitrary. Somewhere it's also systematic. Do you get my point? The second point about language being arbitrary and systematic was also given by Saussure. If you have questions about it, do ask me. The lecture is open for discussion now on second point, arbitrariness and systematic language.